Alright everyone, hello, welcome to part 2 of my thoughts on the Allies expansion. Now, recording this video has been a bit of a disaster, unfortunately. This is now my third attempt. The first one, I went all the way through the rest of the expansion, and it actually took about 2 hours, and then I lost the recording. And then I tried again with just the split piles, and I lost that one as well. It turns out it's actually Sunken treasure zooming in on it. That was giving me big problems for my encoder. I was running this right at the cusp of the CPU, and that's probably because this Dominion client is a little bit more CPU intensive than using the browser. Anyway, what I've done is I've cranked the video quality down. Now, hopefully you can still read the cards well. I mean, to be fair, you're looking at a still image most of the time, so I figured that would be okay. But if the quality is super noticeable and it's pretty horrible, then sorry about that. But I don't really want to lose another recording. Hopefully that's all okay. So I'm just going to be doing the split piles on their own, so it's not too big a video in one chunk in case I lose a bit. And we will have to do the Allies in a third part. I thought it was only going to be 2 parts, but I guess there'll be part 3 soon. So the split piles in Allies, they have 4 cards in them with 4 copies each. So they all have 16 cards in them. And the top one is a rotator. It can rotate the pile. And what that means is that you bottom deck all copies of the card on the top of the supply pile until another one is basically revealed and put on top. And what this allows you to do, essentially, is buy the cards underneath this much larger pile without having to buy out all the ones on top initially. So we're going to start with Odysseys because this one was blowing up my recording, and if something goes wrong, hopefully we won't lose too much like I have done before. So, Old Map is the top card of this pile. +1 card, +1 action, discard a card, +1 card. You may rotate the Odysseys. So this one is, in many ways, a lot like Fugitive from the Peasant line in Adventures. This draws 2 cards and then discards a card. It is worse than Fugitive because what you are doing is essentially... Sorry, where are we? Here we go. You are essentially discarding a card in the middle of before you draw the last card. And that means that if you would have normally discarded the second card, you don't get a chance to do so with Old Map. This is generally a very good card, though, because this sort of sifting that isn't hurting your hand size is generally quite good. It's really nice for just that little bit of extra reliability. The fact that this doesn't really hurt your deck because it's a cantrip is really nice for a rotator. And the little bit of cycling that you get from this is quite nice. So I do tend to find myself opening with this card quite a bit, or at least buying it somewhat early in the game, right? It doesn't really feel like it hurts your deck that much, and that's really nice. Most of the time, I find myself getting Old Map because it's just so inoffensive for your deck, and that means that the Odysseys usually get rotated through very easily, quite a lot. They're very accessible in games with them, and that's good because there's an interesting set of cards here that you might cycle through this pile quite frequently because cards that you want to get at different times. The next card in here is Voyage. This is a very weird one. When you look at it first, you're like, huh, this is a bit weird. So this is sort of an extra turn giver, like Outpost. It's non-terminal, +1 action. If the previous turn wasn't yours, take an extra turn after this one, during which you can only play 3 cards from your hand. So that's a pretty significant restriction on this card. But one thing that's really important to note about Voyage, and it's not immediately obvious, is that unlike cards like Outpost and a lot of the other sources of extra turns in the game, this one is not restricted. If you play multiple Voyages on one turn, including Throne Rooming Voyage, you do get multiple extra turns. So you can get a lot of extra turns through Voyage. It's actually very easy to do so. However, there's very, very restricted extra turns. Note that it says play 3 cards from your hand. There are ways to get around this. So, for example, Contract and Royal Galley can play cards without them being from your hand, so they don't count. You've got stuff like Prince as well, the promo card that will play a card at the start of every turn, that sort of thing. However, generally, you're not really looking to do that much on your Voyage turns. What you're generally trying to do is effectively... what I'm trying to say, you're trying to find like a decent card to play, like a good attack or a good payload, and maybe some treasures, and then you like buy one thing. Like that's typical. There are, of course, decks where Voyage just isn't good at all, and that's going to be the decks where you're like playing lots and lots of cantrips. Admittedly, Old Map contributes to that. Like it's not really a card you want to be playing on your Voyage turns. But, if you just have a deck that's filled with like skirmishes and markets and so on, it's probably not very good for Voyage. Another thing that's pretty bad for Voyage is a lot of duration cards. So the problem that duration cards have is that if they're going to do something next turn, sometimes you don't really want them to do that on your Voyage turn. Like if you activate all of your highwaymen, you're going to draw a huge number of cards on your Voyage turn, but then you can't play any other cards. And the problem is that it's hard to then get those cards back into play. Like you can't play your highwaymen on your Voyage turn, and then you just lose them for your next turn, right? So, so Voyage really doesn't like good duration cards. It doesn't like engines with lots of like spammable cards, which to be fair sounds like a lot of good engines, but you might be surprised at how good Voyage can be sometimes. Like even in those decks, maybe you just occasionally skip your Voyage turn, but what you're really doing is like gambling on having some good effect that you're able to trigger once. Like Voyage, it's a stock card, but otherwise it's not that harmful in your deck, so it will surprise you, actually. Like, it can sometimes just be a weird, awkward workshop. But it tends to be better, I find, when you've got a decent number of treasures density in your deck, because that way, like, you should be able to play some treasures and hopefully buy a cheap card or something, like, at its worst, you're hoping. It has another niche use where it can eat a Lich skipped turn as well. Like the turn wasn't really going to be that good, so you just skip your Voyage turn instead, and then you get to use Lich as a draw card. But we're going to get to Lich a little bit later. Now comes Sunken Treasure. It's not blown up my recording, has it? No? Good. Excellent. Sunken Treasure has ended up being actually one of my favourite cards in Allies. A little bit weird. I certainly wouldn't have thought so when I first looked at it, but it's actually a lot of fun, I think. So this is a treasure gain and action card you don't have a copy of in play. Well, there's an immediate synergy there with like Voyage, in that you have a Voyage turn, you just play a Sunken Treasure, if you could like top deck it for your Voyage turn or something, and you just get to pick basically any card you want, like, well, except Voyage, I suppose, because that's in play. Now, sort of like Voyage again, doesn't really like duration cards that well. Part of the issue, of course, being that they stay in play and then you can't gain copies of them. But I find Sunken Treasure a lot of fun in sort of trying to get it to gain a lot of stuff. Sometimes you have to give up playing a card. I find that once you've got like more than 2 copies of a card, like 2 or more rather, Sunken Treasure sort of struggles to ever gain any more copies of it, and eventually like it'll stop being useful. But Sunken Treasure can be very strong because there's no restriction on the cost of the action card. It's just any action card in the supply, basically, that you have access to. So city quarters are fine, possession or whatever, like golem or something, like those are all okay as well. So 6 cost cards like Marquis or King's Court, all very, very good cards to gain with Sunken Treasure, and it can gain you a lot of cards over the game. And then, like, if it doesn't get you them anymore, you can just, trash Sunken Treasure, I guess, right? Like, that's fine. So, yeah, this has actually been a very good card, and if you think it's a bit weird and you're sort of not sure about it, I do recommend you just try, like, picking it up and buying it. It's actually very good, I think, Sunken Treasure. Pretty good. Just very good gainer, non-terminal, of course, because it's treasure. And now Distant Shore, so another card, like a lot of these Odysseys ones that seem a bit weird at first. This is a victory card, but it's also like a laboratory. +2 cards, +1 action, gain an estate, and then it's worth 2 points as well. Well, why would you want to gain an estate with a laboratory? Doesn't this seem a little bit contradictory, right? It's earning you points, but it's filling you up with the stop cards, which sort of goes against why you bought the laboratory in the first place. Well, the thing with this is that actually it's really good the first time through you play it. Like, sure, it gains an estate, but you haven't drawn it yet. And then the second time through, like, now it's more like a cantrip. One of those cards that you get is spent on the estate. And it only really starts hurting you on, like, the third play. Well, That can be a while sometimes, and, at the point where you want to start buying victory cards, it's really nice to have a victory card that sort of, it's getting worse for your deck over time, but it's actually a benefit initially. If you can start picking up Distant Shores when you think the game's going to end within like 2 or 3 shuffles or something, this is pretty good for points. It costs 6, and after 2 plays, you'll have had 4 points, 2 from the Distant Shore itself and like 2 from the 2 estates that you got. It can also help like empty the estate pile for a pile out as well. But I do find if you get this too early, you are going to clog up your deck with estates unless you specifically have a reason to want estates otherwise, like Inheritance or Shepherd or something. Yeah, but Distant Shore has generally been quite good. The fact that there's Sunken Treasure to help pick it up, despite the fact that it's expensive, is really beneficial, actually. So Distant Shore's ended up, being good. In fact, all of the cards in this pile are generally quite good, I think, and I tend to... Voyage is probably the most niche, I would say, but otherwise... like, you use all of these quite a lot. Like, maybe I just enjoy Sunken Treasure and I want to get it to work, but I think this pile's pretty powerful overall, I would say. Old map, I almost never don't buy old map at some point, even if you were to ignore the rest of the pile. But you don't tend to ignore the rest of the pile in my experience, right? Like, you are probably at least going to get, like, Distant Shore a lot of the time. So let's move on to Townsfolk. So this is the cheap split pile in the Town Crier costs 2, and like everything's like 3, 4, 5 instead of 3 to 6 costs. Town Crier has surprised me by actually being really good. Choose 1, 2 coins, or gain a silver, or +1 card and +1 action. You may rotate the Townsfolk. So this sort of can be like a terminal silver that ends up just cantripping itself into safety, like once you don't need it anymore. Like, it doesn't really get in the way because you can just pick the do nothing cantrip option. And this has actually been surprisingly useful. Like, if you're ever a bit worried about, like, do you want a silver long term in your deck? Well, you don't have to worry about that with Town Crier. And, this is really nice on a 2-5 split because you're sort of like getting the cheap silver in a way. And you can totally open this with another terminal, and if they collide, you can just cantrip this out of the way, which, isn't necessarily as good as having had a silver, but it is very low risk in doing that. So I've been quite surprised. I have used like all of the options before in games, like sometimes later on I just think, I need a bit more economy, and I totally just gain a silver with Town Crier, right? And then I've just got more money next time. Or because I'm looking to like cantrip Town Crier most of the time at that point, because maybe I don't have like the village space for it. But yeah, this has been a solid card all round. I mean, it costs 2, right? So you don't expect it to be very powerful, but generally it's been very pleasant to have in your deck, right? And it's been really nice. I do find myself getting Town Crier quite a bit. However, like, rotating is not as useful as the Odysseys pile, and we'll sort of get into why as we look for these. So Blacksmith, the next one. This is another pretty solid card. I think choose 1, draw until you have 6 cards in hand, or +2 cards, or +1 card and +1 action. So you're picking 1 out of 3 options again. As draw to X card, this is pretty good. It's a lot like Watchtower, cost 3, action, draws you up to 6, which is actually pretty good. It's only 1 less than Library, but it costs 3 instead of 5, is really important to make this work. Now, the problem is that there's only like 4 of them in the pile, but yeah, it doesn't have the other benefits that Watchtower has, but generally this card's okay. Like, at worst, even if you've already got a larger deck, it's a moat. And if you can't play it for whatever reason, you do get to just cantrip it out the way. Now, it has, early on when I was playing with this, I was like overbuying blacksmiths and I was just like cantripping them a lot. In reality, like, if you never think you're actually going to play this for draw, like, you shouldn't really be buying it, let's be real. But otherwise, this is pretty solid. And it works quite well with Elder as well. We'll talk about that more when I talk about Elder. But generally, this card's been okay, but sometimes there's just better draw on the Kingdom, and I don't really care for this. Miller, this one's been pretty disappointing. I think that's a shame because Miller is my surname, although I spell it better than ER. It's an AR. But I was really hoping this card could be like my card because it's got my name on it. But no, I don't want this to be associated with me. Sadly, it's not that good, I don't think, unfortunately. So +1 action, look at the top 4 cards of your deck, put 1 into your hand and discard the rest. This is really good if you want to look through and find a specific card, but honestly, it almost has too large of a search space. effects. Like, you compare this to like the 2-cost Border Guard from Renaissance, which looks at the next 2 cards of your deck and takes one, and possibly like 3. What I find with Miller is that a lot of the time, unfortunately, I am just like discarding a bunch of cards that actually I would have wanted. Like, it's a lot easier with Miller to like find 2 good cards and then one of them is discarded, which is effectively the equivalent of like bottom decking it, and that's pretty nasty, right? Like, if this 3 out of these 4 cards are like really good cards, then you could actually be setting yourself back, like especially if they're villages and draw cards and good engine pieces. So it's sort of like a cantrip that tries to find you cards, but I think that it's actually potentially like a lot of the time with cantrips, like you sort of want to add them because they don't hurt you, but Miller sort of can. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Like, it feels sometimes like it's actively detrimental if you try and throw too many in. Also, it costs 4, so it's got like the secret passage problem in a way, and that it's doing a tiny thing for you, and it's like, man, when do you get this? Because there's so many other things, and it's hiding in a split pile, so it's not even available a lot of the time. So Miller, like, I'm just never really gaining it, I find. And when I have gained it, I haven't really been that impressed with it, I'm afraid to say. It's okay as a card. Now, I know in the previews, Donald X said that it was for finding, like, Elder and pairing it up with stuff. Well, I think that's got some issues as well, but we'll get to that now. So let's move on to Elder. So Elder's a pretty weird card here, very unique, does a very fancy thing. It's sort of like a silver because it gives you +2 coins, and then it's non-terminal because you play another action card from your hand. However, when that card gives you a choice of abilities, such as choose one, this turn you may choose an extra different option. So it's sort of like a silver, but you get other benefits based on the other thing that you are going to get from the card that you play after it. Now, there are 2 choose one cards in this pile. There's Town Crier and Blacksmith. So, like, you can treat Elder in a way like almost... It's not really a conspirator, like, it's giving you an extra +1 card and +1 action and 2 coins, but, you know, it is sort of like a village in that regard. Like, it's a village that's giving you 2 coins because Elder itself has, like, +1 action on it. So it's really nice in a way if you hit it with, like, a Town Crier, you're getting a village effect, you know, and 2 coins from Elder, like, well, okay. Like, it does, well, I say it gives you a village effect, but you know, it is still losing you hand size, right? It's not completely, like, hand size neutral because Elder itself, like, is a stop card. One card it is very good with is Blacksmith. This is excellent because it solves all of these problems. So, with Blacksmith, you... instead of like drawing to 6, you get to either draw to 7 by picking the 6 and the 2 options, or you can draw to 7 and have it be non-terminal as well by picking the cantrip option. And that's really good. Like, draw to 7 non-terminally is excellent. And also there is the fact that the Elder is letting you draw an extra card by the fact that it was like a stop card. So you get it out of your hand when you play it with Blacksmith, and then Blacksmith gets to draw a replacement because it's draw until, you know, it's a draw to X card. So Blacksmith is an excellent target for Elder. Another card from Allies that I want to say is an excellent target for Elder, if you can pair them up, is actually Broker. The reason why Broker works out pretty well, I think, is because what it is that, you know, unlike, say, like a throne room with Broker, you have to trash 2 cards. But when you Elder Broker, you only have to trash 1, but you get 2 lots of the bonuses for the 1 trash. And that's good because it gives you the opportunity to hit a really, like, high-cost card with Broker and then get a huge amount of benefit from it, right? You can draw, like, you trash a gold and you get, like, 6 cards and 6 coins at the same time from the 1 trash. And so that's giving you like very substantial benefit from the Elder specifically, because you're just getting so much more value out of the one trash. Broker can struggle sometimes without something like this helping it, and Elder is an excellent reason to like pair it up with Broker if you can. This can get very, very powerful with that. There are other cards in other expansions. I'm not really going to go through them all, but, like Nobles is pretty decent with Elder. But for the most part, this is sort of a slightly gimmicky combo card in a way. So, you want to... you don't really get it a lot. Like, I think it slightly disappointed me in a way. The Blacksmith engine with Elder is quite fun, in my experience. I really like building that. And it's pretty good, but, the cards are limited. There's only 4 of each. And if there's other draw in the kingdom, that's usually much more accessible. And, so you just sort of don't do that. So I find myself just not buying Elder anymore. When I first started playing with this pile, I was buying and using Elder a bit, but then I just stopped doing it, and I felt like overall I was actually having better decks when I just wasn't bothering with Elder. Maybe Elder should have been the 4-cost card and something else should have been in the 5 slot, right? I don't know. But that's been my experience with Townsfolk. Like, I think because Town Crier is good, like, overall this pile is nice when it shows up, but I'm not necessarily actually engaging with the rest of the Townsfolk that much, but they do come out sometimes, and they're all right. So let's move on to Wizards. So Student is actually a liaison. It puts an ally in the game if there wasn't one. This is a trash card, which is a bit awkward for being the rotator, because sometimes this is your only trash card, and that means that Student is actually very important, right? This is a non-terminal trash card, and you can trash quite a lot with it, as we'll go in too soon. So sometimes you're just forced to take a Student, and that could be a problem if you hit like a 5-2. I'd say more so than any other rotator, like you really need to get on this one when it's important, just because trashing is so good when it's available. Now, Student is a little bit weird and awkward as a trasher. So when you trash a card from your hand, if it's a treasure, you get a favour, and then Student immediately goes out of play and goes back on top of your deck. Now, what that does mean in a default situation is that you get to like trash a card every turn. But the thing is that you really want to be, like, to keep up the pace of trashing, you want to be trashing the coppers instead of the estates. But the problem if you do that is that you just end up with a really high density of like estates over coppers, and you can't buy anything. And in addition to that, like, Student is knocking you down to 3 useful cards in play every turn, because like you play the Student, you trash a copper, you got 3 cards left, and if those are estates, like, man, what are you buying? Nothing. Student early on can actually give you serious economy problems as a result of this. So I would recommend that actually you should consider like hitting the estates. Maybe when you're about to shuffle, like, consider smashing an estate instead of a copper, and then like just hope that the Student like naturally came on top of the deck when you shuffled, right? Like, to keep up the pace maybe and get rid of the estates. It is worth notable the Fellowship of Scribes ally is particularly good with Student, the one that lets you draw a card when you go down below 4 cards in hand, because Student will immediately redraw itself, and you can sort of cheat it like a chapel in that regard. If you drew Student with 3 coppers and an estate, using Fellowship of Scribes, like all those favours immediately, you can actually clean out your hand that turn. So that's a neat combo. But yeah, otherwise Student, what it's doing is it's giving you the favours straight away, so you sort of like front load a lot of your favours. So it can be tempting to play all of your favours then like early on, but you should really consider the fact that favour gaining will stop with Student after a certain point. I mean, you can technically like start buying other treasures like coppers to try and like get more favours out of Student, but the problem is that the Student and the copper is already drawing 2 cards, but then the Student, when you trash it, will top deck itself, and you have to draw it again, right? So that's like 3 stop card space for 1 favour, which is pretty awful, right? That's pretty bad in terms of space. So yeah, you got to be real careful with that. It takes a lot of effort once you've cleaned out your coppers to actually get more favours out of this. So a lot of the time you just got to consider that your favours are limited with Student, and plan appropriately, I guess, in that regard. Now, the next card, Conjurer, is also very powerful in this set. This is a workshop, and if you gain a card with it and you play it, it stays in play, and then this card, the Workshop, goes straight back into your hand at the start of your next turn. So you've got like a 6-card hand, and the Conjurer is there. And what this means is that you can just play it every turn, and you can gain a lot of cards very quickly with this. Now, given that if you're playing with Student as well, your hand turns are probably like rubbish otherwise. If you miss out on getting Conjurer early, like, you can really, really fall behind quite a lot. So if you're like trashing with Student and your opponent is trashing with Student, but they're also conjuring every turn, like, clearly their deck's going to get a lot better than yours very fast, because you can't really do anything while you're like playing the Student a lot early. So that means, and this is really important, I've found with this Wizards pile, if Conjurer looks like it's going to be good, you must prepare yourself real fast to make sure that you can buy Conjurer exactly when it's going to show up. Even if that means that you mustn't trash with Student on this turn. Like, maybe you have to open Student with Silver so that you can hit 4 when it shows up, right? And you just maybe you have to trash an estate that turn instead of a copper. You really don't want to miss out on Conjurer. Bear in mind that because Student is top decking itself sometimes, the Conjurer can come and go really fast. Right, like someone plays Student, reveals Conjurer, next turn they're going to play Student again and move it out the way, and then you really seriously miss your chance. And yeah, you can rotate it back to Conjurer, but it's going to take a number of turns, because ideally your opponent won't be helping you do that, right, if they know what's the right thing to do. And then it's taking you like 3 trashes to put the Conjurer back on top. Like, yeah, so that's pretty nasty. So really do not miss out on this card. This card is key in this pile, I find. Student and Conjurer, very, very good cards in this pile. Do not miss this, basically. Like, you've got to think that straight away when you see Wizards. You're just like, do I want Conjurer? How do I make sure that I get the Conjurer when it's available? Next card I've been pretty disappointed with, Sorcerer. So this is like Sorceress, which, of course, in Augers, of course, this recording, I haven't gone over Sorceress yet because I started at Odysseys this time. So, +1 card, +1 action. Each other player names a card, and then they look at the top card of their deck, or reveal it, and if they guessed incorrectly, they gain a curse. Note that that card does go back, so Sorcerer effectively, unless you can then change the card that's on top of their deck, it only really works once between that player's turns. And it might not work that one time because they guess correctly. So Sorcerer's not actually very good at junking. It doesn't stack. That includes if you're playing with like more than 2 players, multiple people playing Sorcerers, like only one of them, like the first one, might actually do anything against opponent. So this is pretty bad as a cursor. Yeah, it's a cantrip cursor, but sometimes it doesn't work and it's limited to 1. In addition to that, it's costing you 5, and it's not even available a lot of the time because it's inside this split pile, and this split pile also has a trasher in it with Student. So it's not like very slow cursing is necessarily going to be a problem for them, because they can just trash the curse with the Student, like on the turns where you do get one. So Sorcerer's been pretty rubbish for me, I think. In practice, this card has not really worked out. I just haven't really seen it do very much, and I skip it a lot of the time, basically. Like, I just don't think this card is really doing much here. It's not really working out, unfortunately. Next on this, the last card in this pile, pretty interesting one. It is Lich. So Lich, +6 cards, +2 actions. This seems nuts when you first look at it. That is a huge value, but then it says skip a turn. And what that means is that your turn effectively doesn't happen except for like the purposes of working out the tie break. So your durations stay in play over your skip turn. You just do nothing at all. Obviously this is very, very bad. Turns are very important, and losing one can be completely catastrophic. A lot of the time you're just not playing Lich unless it's like the final turn of the game, in which case, it could be really, really good there. Where Lich is very good is its on trash effect. When you trash this, discard it and gain a cheaper card from the trash. So you can't get rid of this card. It's sort of a bit like Fortress, but it's not going back into your hand. And of course, because it costs 6, it is prime fuel for like remodeling into provinces. So you can do a lot. Now, you are forced to gain a card from the trash, and that's probably going to be like estates in there. But if you do have something like remodel or broker, sort of a cost-relevant trasher, you might actually have other good cards in there as well, and then Lich is just very, very good, right? This can be an incredible card. You don't play with it a lot of the time. Like, it really needs other cards to work. Sometimes you can combo with Voyage to skip your Voyage turns instead. But, I have also seen situations where people buy it right near the end of the game and then they just have it to have an amazing last turn. But it can be a bit of a gamble sometimes. Like, if you don't actually end the game on that turn, you could be in trouble with Lich. So be very careful there when you play with this. Now, we're going to go all the way back to Augers here. We're going to start with this. So, I didn't say Wizards overall. Overall for the Wizards pile. The top 2 cards are the things that I'm really interested in most of the time, and they're both pretty good, basically. It is probably more so than any other the one where you want to really not lose the rotator, I find, in certain situations at least. And the favours can be quite important as well, sometimes depending on what the ally is that it's given you. So coming up to Augers now, so this one's been sort of more of average pile, I think, overall. At first glance, it looked like it was going to be like an all-in-one engine. You can probably see there's a plus buy. There's like a trasher that gains golds. There's a junker, and there's like a laboratory style card. So you got your draw, you got your plus buy, you got your payload, you got an attack, right? Like, that's got like a lot of stuff that you need for a good engine. So what's going on with this pile? So we'll start with Herb Gatherer first of all. This has a plus buy on it. Sometimes this can be the only plus buy on the board, and it is on the rotator. So there is a question, if this is the only plus buy, do you have to open with it in case you lose it? Right? What if your opponent opens with it and drops access to Herb Gatherer? So there is a bit of an out, as we will go through. The Herb Gatherer pile, even without the rotator, has things in it that will, like, over time, allow you to churn through the pile anyway. However, so it's not necessarily that good, but it depends on really how early you actually want the buy. Like, if the only reason why you want plus buy is because eventually, like, you're going to be double provincing, maybe there's no rush for it. If you want plus buy because there's stuff like Peddler that really wants plus buy, like, straight away, then sure, like, maybe you mustn't miss out on the Herb Gatherer. But the whole point of this card, the main sort of gameplay of it, you are forced to put your deck into your discard pile, and then you may play a treasure from your discard pile. And so what it's sort of meant to be is that this card's getting a little bit better as you get better treasures, right? So if you have like a silver as well, this is sort of like messenger, 2 coins and a buy. Obviously gold is a lot nicer, and maybe you've got other special treasures like Sunken treasure as well or whatever. This card, like, you open with it, you sort of really, really need to be having silver as your other opening buy as well. You sort of don't really want to be playing Herb Gatherer without at least a silver in your deck anywhere. Now, the immediate cycling is fast, is a bit random with these sorts of things. Like, if you draw a Herb Gatherer turn 3 and you play it, great, you cycle immediately, but if you don't, then maybe that's a bit slower. But also the forced cycling can mean that sometimes you keep finding Herb Gatherer before you find some other card you want to play, and as a result you never actually play that other card unless you stop playing Herb Gatherer. In terms of opening, as I said, you really, really need to be opening this with silver, and if you don't want to open this and silver because something else is good, then generally I would probably hold off on the Herb Gatherer a little bit if that's possible. If there's other sources of buy, then that's fine. Like Herb Gatherer, it's on its face of it, it doesn't seem that good, but it does have synergies with like every other card in the pile, or at least 2 of the others, which we'll get to now. But Herb Gatherer does have its place, and it can be pretty decent in combo with the other Augers, I think. So first up there is Acolyte. You may trash an action or victory card from your hand to gain a gold. You may trash this to gain an augur. So 2 effects. You only have to do 1, but you can do both. You can do like either of them. What this is doing, you ideally would be using this to trash an estate into a gold, which is a pretty good effect. I'll notice that this effect is normally like either it's got a downside or it's just not available straight away. Like Transmute, you can't get immediately. This is the second card in a split pile. what's the card? Displace the promo. You have to gain like a copper if you're going to do this. But generally, like trashing an estate into a gold is actually pretty good conversion. Like, yeah, it's still a stock card, but, you know, early gold, like by replacing an estate, is actually a pretty good improvement to your deck a lot of the time. You know, it really helps out with your early economy a bit. This can't trash coppers, of course, so it's not like a real trasher. But generally, another reason why this is quite good is because you get to exchange it a little bit later for another Auger. If that wasn't the case, I'm not sure this card would necessarily be that good, but as it is, I'm quite happy to pick this up because it may only be a temporary thing, but it might do something good for me then. In the event that it doesn't, well, you can churn through the acolytes with this. It will take a little while, but you can do it, and that's sort of the main blocker behind getting back to Herb Gatherer if you didn't have one because you need the plus buy, because the next two cards are both like very spammable cards, so you can just throw a bunch into your deck, and you usually want them anyway. So let's take a look at those. So Sorcerer is a very important card in this pile. I think this is quite powerful in the right situation. This is like the much, much better version of Sorcerer. So it's like a cantrip, but you have to guess what your next card is instead of your opponent. And if you guess correctly, everyone else gets a curse. It doesn't say +1 card on it, but you are revealing the next card and putting it into your hand. So it is kind of like a cantrip cursor in that regard. This is much, much better. There are ways to set this up, including with Sybil that's in this pile that we're going to go over next. And when you can guarantee this, you know, it's just a cantrip cursor, which is actually very good. We learned from Familiar that cantrip cursing can be excellent. You know, it can get junk in pretty fast. It's easy to support in your deck. And then when the curses are out, you know, it's just safe in your deck. It's not really doing anything. It's just a cantrip. So yeah, this has been quite good. I think that this is important for the pile. This pile, if you really want to go all in on Augers, it can take a little while to build up. And so Sorceress slowing down your opponent in that way is pretty good. The curses, you know, when they're good, I think Augers is a very good pile. Sorceress is a large part of what makes Augers a really good pile, I think, for like when it's important. Out of all this, Sybil, this looks nuts at first. +4 cards, +1 action, wow. But then you have to put a card from your hand on top of your deck, and then another one on the bottom. So this is actually more like a laboratory variant. You get 2 cards overall. At least that's what the initial reading looks like. Now, of course, by top decking a card, you can basically guarantee Sorceress, so there's a bit of a combo there. You get to suddenly get some pretty good draw going, while at the same time cursing your opponent. You know, that's sort of the power of Augers there. But the other thing is that it's a bit better than Laboratory even then, because you're sort of kind of sifting through your deck, right? By bottom decking a bunch of cards, you get to like look further into your deck and draw a little bit further than that you would. And the other thing that's important is that you don't necessarily have to draw the bottom cards of your deck. And if you don't do that, Sybil's actually a little bit stronger. It's like having +3 cards and +1 action and like sifting 1 card. And what prevents you from having to draw the bottom card of your deck? Well, it is, of course, Herb Gatherer. It can discard all those cards that you bottom decked. And if that is the case, then, you know, you never draw it. So this is sort of like more synergy with the pile, really. It likes the gold from Acolyte, and it sort of likes the bottom decking of Sybil to like get away from that. So yeah, overall, Augers has got some nice cards in there. Like, clearly Sybil seems pretty good, right? And Sorceress as well. It's a little bit awkward at the start. Like, Herb Gatherer might take a while until it actually starts feeling like it's good in your deck, and it's a bit random if you get it early on. But I would say Augers is a pretty average pile overall in the end. It's these, you know, the bottom cards are better than the top cards, really, in this case. And sometimes that stops you getting to the bottom cards, but otherwise it's fine. Oh, I did notice a little message on my OBS about recording. This might desync slightly. It might be that the video is slightly delayed, but it seems to be running okay. So hopefully this video is fine. Well, we're nearly there. There's only 2 more split piles to go through. So, battle plan. +1 card, +1 action. You may reveal an attack card from your hand for +1 card. You may rotate any supply pile. Well, straight away, you know, this is a cantrip, which is really nice for just having in your deck a rotator, not getting in the way. But it can be a laboratory for 3 if you pair it with an attack card. And that's really, really good effect. Now, it turns out there are 2 attack cards in this pile, which is, you know, really good, I guess, for Battle Plan, and they're both excellent attacks, as it turns out. So Battle Plan is actually a pretty good card. I find people open with it, and then they rotate it away pretty fast, not only because, like, the second card, Archer's very good, but also you sort of don't really want your opponent to get the battle plans at first. What I find is that people come back for the battle plans later, like once you've gone through the first half of the pile, like, or grabbed what you want on the first pass through. Like, people come back for the battle plans, the person with the better deck. Sometimes you don't want too many battle plans, though, and we'll find out why later. The next thing really important here with battle plan, you'll notice it says you may rotate any supply pile. This one's got a little bit of a gimmick in that it can rotate anything. You can rotate the other split piles from allies, but also there are split piles in other expansions as well. So, like Empires, for example, has the castles. You can rotate this pile. You can rotate to, like, get access to fortune straight away, which is really, really good. And of course, Dark Ages as well has your knights. You don't like the knight on top, just swap to another one. And like the ruins as well, if you need to, like, fish for ruined market or something. So a little bit more niche, but it does those things. It's more cute than anything, but sometimes it shows up, and it's pretty good when it does show up, actually. That's like a nice extra effect that it does. Let's talk about Archer next. So Archer, it's a discard attack, +2 coins. Each other player with 5 or more cards in hand reveals all but one and discards one of them that you choose. So Archer effectively targeting the second best card in someone's hand. And I find this is generally very good. I think this is sort of on par with Militia. Sure, you're not discarding the 2 worst cards, it's only 1, but the second best card is usually a lot better than that. You can cripple both money sort of decks and engine-y decks with this, like money-based decks, like even if you're knocking out like a silver and they're holding a gold, that might be enough to stop them from hitting province. And with the engine-y decks, like maybe you're knocking out villages or draw cards, and that can be a big problem as well for their reliability, and they like dud a lot. So Archer is just generally good all the time, I find. Maybe the only thing that stops it being good is that Militia is available or something like that. But yeah, like Archer, just a solid attack card all round. And you tend to buy it because also it's really good for Battle Plan. In many ways, like you sort of open Battle Plan to get to Archer straight away, and then you've got like possibly a laboratory and like a really good attack very early on. And this is really good for slowing down your opponent and being really good for you too. You know, this is the silver type effect as well is nice, like the economy, the 2 coins. So all round very solid card is Archer. Very good for like all sorts of boards, I find. Yeah, very powerful. I can't think of many decks that wouldn't be hurt by Archer. Like, this is just a solid attack. Warlord is interesting because this is a very, very anti-engine attack. This is probably the most anti-engine attack that we've ever seen. It does nothing against money decks, whereas normally most attacks are like brutal against money decks. This is the complete opposite. So this is sort of a bit like Den of Sin initially. It's a non-terminal action. It's a duration at the start of your next turn +2 cards. Until then, other players can't play an action from their hand that they have 2 or more copies of in play. Well, that is very significant. It means that spammable cards are not spammable anymore, basically. It's a real big problem, particularly if a village pile, there's only like 1 in the kingdom, because you only effectively get to play 2 villages on a turn. That means you get like 3 terminals max. And that's a serious problem for building an engine a lot of the time. Like, it really dampens the output of the engine, but also its ability to draw as well. Now, Warlord, of course, is a draw card on its own. It's non-terminal, and then like Battle Plan is a bit of a laboratory as well, so like drawing isn't normally always that hard. You do need 2 of these to get the effect every turn, so if you can have 2 and your opponent only has like 1, and then you can rotate the pile away, you do, at least for maybe a little while, you still get to actually build a bit more of a bigger engine while your opponent doesn't get to like kill your turns as often. That you do even then still want to avoid like adding too many redundant action cards into your hand, like 3rd copies. There are ways to get around the fact that this is only playing action cards from your hand, but bear in mind that a lot of those ways to get around that do involve effectively playing a card at the start of your turn, which is bad for Warlord because that stops you then playing cards in your hand later because that card is now in play. Not always, but that's what I tend to find with this versus something like, say, Voyage instead, where you're actually fine to have extra cards played at the start of your turn, like you summoned them or something with the promo event. So Warlord, I find that just the mere presence of Clash on the board changes how you build. Like, you really don't want to be in a situation where Warlord KOs your deck because you can't play anything anymore. So you have to just sort of build under the assumption that someone's going to start playing it, at least until it starts to get too late if no one's bought one, for them to really start buying it and using it at that point. So Warlord, very, very centralising card. And Clashes in general dominates games, I find. Like, Kazach is so good, and Warlord is so good, and even Battle Plan is pretty good. This is very, very unskippable. It just works a lot of the time, this deck, basically. Very good cards in here. If you can get that Warlord coverage every turn, like that can just like shut down some engines sometimes, and then like players have no choice but to try and build a more like money-based thing, because it's not stopping you playing multiple money cards or treasures per turn, and then you're just sort of hoping to do this sort of like a little bit of draw with money sort of thing maybe, and find the Warlords and play them every turn while having treasures. I don't know, it's a bit weird, but that's sort of what you have to do if the Clashes are really good. Now, the last card of this pile, Territory. This is the least exciting card of the pile, but it's still pretty interesting. It does a unique thing. So it's a victory card worth 1 point per differently named victory card you have, and then it has a below line effect. When you gain this, gain a gold per empty supply pile. Now, the problem with the effect at the bottom is that Clashes, by the nature of Warlord, means that people are not like spam emptying a pile with the card that you can spam, and what that means is that unfortunately the supply piles aren't emptying, and so this sort of effect isn't really going to trigger a lot, but I have had games where it triggers, and it's pretty nice sometimes to get a gold through this. You buy this instead of a gold, and then you'll get like a bunch of points as well. The default scenario, of course, is that this is worth 4 points because you get a province, a duchy, and an estate as well. But I find that as long as there is any other victory card available, Territory starts to get really, really good. Like 5 points is very good. I mean, 4 is also pretty good, but you can even go up to like 6 points, and then like Territory starts, competing with province, but a lot cheaper. And the thing is that, like say all the Warlords empty, and like normally the battle plans then go. This is only one rotation away from being available all the time, so you sort of can't really block access to it. So it starts to become a more like interesting and relevant thing then. But this is only okay, I guess. I mean, it's just a pure victory card inside a pile that's otherwise very good. And like when this card gets better, it's really nice, I suppose, when there's other things to boost it. There are like Distant Shores and Stronghold in allies as well, like the bottom cards of 2 other split piles. So, there are options there. Territory is going to be a bit better. Obviously, this is bonkers with like Castles, which just has a bazillion. It's got 8, not a bazillion. 8 differently named victory cards inside the one pile, and Territory like gets silly. And of course, you have Battle Plan to rotate through the castles at the same time. So that's an interesting one to watch out for, at least. But the Territory is only okay, but overall Clashes is very, very strong, and I think it like centralises the game around it when it shows up. You do just get cards like that sometimes. This is you are going to be hit with attacks a lot when Clashes is around, because they're just very good attacks, really. Low hand sizes, Archers knocking out good cards, Warlords stopping you building a good engine. That's just how it goes. Okay, so last but not least, we have Forts. So people rag on Tent quite a lot. They're like, Tent, this sucks. This is like one of the worst cards in the game. Bottom 10, terrible. I don't think it's that bad at all. But, it certainly looks unimpressive when you first look at it. So what is it? +2 coins, you may rotate the forts. So it's a terminal silver with a rotate. Wow, it's not very good. But when you discard this from play, you may put it onto your deck. So you could play a terminal silver every turn. And honestly, at the start of the game, this effect can actually be pretty good, right? Like, you get some consistent economy with this. Now, like Merchant Camp, it is a bit anti-cycling, right? You don't necessarily want to slow down your progress through the deck, but if what you want to do is be buying like higher priced cards a bit more consistently, early on Tent can do that. Now the problem is that unless you can get villages fast into your deck, you don't really want to be buying another terminal, and there's a lot of times where there are just a really good terminal early on. I don't know, like I use Moneylender as the example of like the early terminal that you want, and this is a bit of an issue for Tent. Normally Tent is only really viable, at least like as an opener, when you're not planning to get another terminal action for a while. And in fact, in general, with the forts, I find that this pile, I say that it's like an extremely terminal pile. The problem is that this is just very, very heavy on your terminal action usage, because while one of them, Hill Fort, is not actually necessarily terminal, like you need a lot of village support to make forts work. Like none of these cards work very well on their own. Maybe Tent is sort of an interesting big money card, like when the board is insanely weak. But like when forts are around, you really want to be playing other actions as well, and this is putting a lot of demand on villages for you, basically. So this is like the main problem with forts, is just the massive terminalness of it all. But if you can deal with that, forts can actually be very, very powerful, because the other cards in the pile, like especially Garrison and Hill Fort, can be incredibly strong. But of course, someone's got to buy Tent at that point. Now, even if you don't open with Tent, I find that it is fine sometimes to just get another Tent eventually. Sometimes you just happen to have a lot of action availability, like maybe you start getting Royal Galleys in your deck and then suddenly you find you've got a surplus of actions, and at that point you can start like going for the forts, and it's sort of okay to do that. Another thing to note, that because Tent, a bit like Student, it keeps top decking itself, and therefore you can churn through this pile pretty fast. And that means that you can get to like Hill Fort early. But before we get to Hill Fort, there is Garrison in the way. This is sometimes a very, very powerful card, but you don't necessarily want it early, so I find you skip over it during the initial pass through this pile, and then you come back to Garrison later. So Garrison plus 2 coins. This turn, when you gain a card, add a token here. At the start of your next turn, remove them for +1 card each. So, what's Garrison, if you've got a lot of gains, this is drawing you in disgustingly large number of cards. So I'm going to take this off a full screen view because my video is not liking it. Garrison, if you can gain a lot, and like, remember, any gain will do, so like Menagerie with horses and all is absolutely fine. Like, you can stack a lot of tokens on Garrison and draw a lot of cards. I did have a game once where I had a lot of buys, and then I put 2 Garrisons in play, and I bought like 7 coppers at the end of the turn, and that was like, on them on their own, was adding like 14 draw to my next turn, where I could also draw those coppers, and that extra money and all that extra draw let me win the game with like a huge turn. That's the sort of power that Garrison has, but you do need like multiple Garrisons. Well, the good news is that there is a workshop on this in this pile as well, and if you can get the Hill Forts, you can cycle back round to Garrison and then start picking them up really quickly as well. In fact, we need to start talking about Hill Fort, because Hill Fort is the classic cantrip workshop potentially, which is can be very powerful. You gain a card costing up to 4, and then you can either cantrip or you can put that into your hand. It is terminal in that case. What is important to note is that if you have already drawn your entire deck, then don't put the card into your hand, choose the cantrip option, and you will immediately draw the card into your hand anyway, but also it was non-terminal. Hill Fort being a like cantrip workshop can be huge. Like, if there is like a bunch of village piles as well, that's really good for forts in general, and Hill Fort can like grab them really easily. You can gain a lot of cards with this. Well, that's also good for Garrison as well, right? That's sort of like the synergy of the forts pile right there. Another thing that's worth noting is that This is another card a bit like Conjurer, where when it's important, you have to make sure you're ready to buy it. But this one's a little bit harder because it costs 5. Well, it just so happens there's already a card in the pile, Tent, that gives you that consistency and like in economy as well. So what can happen is that a person who gets a Tent can just cycle quickly to Hill Fort and then can just start buying Hill Forts consistently every turn. This is another case, probably not so much as it is with Conjurer, but you do have to be on the lookout for basically grabbing Hill Forts when they are available, like when they're good, and make sure your deck is ready to hit 5 at any time, or at least as much as you can. So like if you're just doubled down too much on trashing compared to your opponent, you can just like miss your opportunity for Hill Fort because you like nuked your economy a bit. So do be very careful with that. Like Hill Fort, you know, I've seen a game where someone won the Hill Fort split 3-1 against me, and they just ran away with the game very quickly. It was just so much gaining, and I couldn't keep up. They just got all the good cards, basically. They pinched them from me. Yeah, so, like, Hill Fort, very, very strong, and then, like, you shift into Garrison, and you just draw a load of cards as well. Comparatively, Stronghold at the end here. This card hasn't been quite so impressive in my view. Now, it is a victory card, which is always good. You know, so at the least you're getting points, but, you know, it's quite expensive, and you're choose 1, 3 coins, or at the start of your next turn, plus 3 cards. Well, you compare that to something like Garrison, which is 2 coins now, and then potentially, like, huge amounts of draw next turn. It's almost like you're getting both benefits from this, but it's much, much cheaper, right? I guess this is another decent Elder target as well. Well, it's okay. But yeah, Stronghold, I haven't really been... It seemed all right at first, but then over time, like, it seemed like it wasn't quite as good. It was quite expensive for what I was getting. It's not quite like Nobles, which is both getting you the card draw right now and has got actions like a Village effect as the other one. You know, that's the other 6 cost. Like, really, like, action card that feels a bit similar. But Stronghold's still all right overall. Like, you know, sometimes just points and duration draw is kind of what you need, and Stronghold's giving you those. And the points, you know, they're not irrelevant, but Stronghold otherwise, like, you're sort of paying a premium for what you get out of it, really. And yeah, like, it's fine, but I haven't been too impressed with it over time. Like I say, at first, my first impressions were higher, I think, than when I just started playing with it. But overall, Forts, like, they get a bad rap because people hate Tent, and they think it's bad, and they think, oh, you know, Forts, they know that Garrison and Hill Fort are really strong, but they're like, lol, you never play with this because Tent is bad. Well, I don't know how much I agree with that. But I think people should just try buying Tent a little bit more, and they'll find out that, oh, actually, you know, even if you're getting that bit of anti-cycling, like, the better economy early on is sometimes really good. Like, sometimes that's what you want, right? You just need that more economy early on, and Tent can work really well. You know, there are cards like a Bounty Hunter, which is like trashing non-terminally. Tent's going to be really good with that. Even like Student or Forager, you know, that sort of thing. Tent can be very good there, because you're sort of getting the trashing in, but also you're like keeping your economy up a little bit. Like, you know, there are ways, I guess, of making Tent work, but it depends a lot either on the opening, or you need to have, like, in general with Forts, as I said, villages are really important. You've got to have very, very good village space, and then Forts can get very, very good, basically. Well, that's it for the split piles. I'm not going to dare to try anymore. This has been nearly an hour. I've had the encoding error show up a few times, and I'm a little bit worried about this video desyncing and having some problems, and I'm not really going to try recording this for a 4th time. So, yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll have a part 3, by the looks of it, where we get to go over the Allies landscapes. There's 23 of them, so that's like another hour. Gosh, there's so much in this expansion. I didn't think it would take this long, really. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.